Dozens of conspirators, 7 assassins, 1 target. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in 1914 was one of the defining moments of 20th century history. By triggering the First World War, this one brief moment led to countless revolutions, technological advancements, and additional wars, with the effects of the assassination still being felt around the world to this day, over a century later. It is a story that has been told countless times. From the firing of 2 fatal shots one summer morning, to the domino effect that pulled all of the major powers of Europe into war just weeks later. But one part of this story is often overlooked. What happened to those responsible for this act of murder? Beyond the assassination itself, many retellings of this event then relegate the fate of the assassins as a footnote to the rest of the story, or simply just ignore it altogether. On that day in the city of Sarajevo, Bosnia, there were 7 assassins positioned in the crowd along the Apple Quay, the road that the Archduke's car was set to travel down. Their names were Gavrilo Princip, Nedeljko Čabrinović, Trifko Grabež, Danilo Ilić, Muhamed Mehmedbašić, Cvjetko Popović, and Vaso Čubrilović. All 7 had been brought together from within a social landscape abundant with young radicals, who collectively came to be known as Young Bosnia. This group received support from a much more powerful nationalist society in Serbia, called Unification or Death, better known today as the Black Hand. Today, we focus on the lives of these 7 men, their motivations, actions, and above all else, what became of them after that fateful morning of June the 28th, 1914. We begin with Danilo Ilić. Although unarmed and technically not an assassin, Ilić was one of the 7 who lined the streets of Sarajevo on the morning of June 28th. A member of both the Black Hand and Young Bosnia, Ilić played a large part in organising and coordinating the attack by smuggling the weapons and recruiting the assassins. A vital link between the assassination team and some of the higher-ups supporting the plot, Ilić had previously discussed the possibility of political assassinations with the head of the Black Hand, Dragutin Dimitrijević, and was further influenced by his friend, Gavrilo Princip. Ilić helped coordinate the arrival of Princip's group of 3 assassins from Belgrade, whilst also recruiting 3 local radicals in Sarajevo in preparation for the attack. After the assassination, Ilić was interrogated by police, as it was known to them that Princip, the man who had actually committed the murder, had stayed at Ilić's house in Sarajevo. Some sources state that it was Ilić who confessed to the police, which led to the arrest of the remaining assassins. If it was an attempt by Ilić to save himself, then it was a miscalculated one. As one of the only 2 people in the group over the age of 20, he was eligible for the death sentence under Austro-Hungarian law, which is exactly what he was condemned to at the end of the conspirators' trial in October 1914. On February 3rd, 1915, Ilić was hanged at the Sarajevo barracks at the age of 24. Nedeljko Čabrinović, a member of the Belgrade group of assassins, Čabrinović is today mainly remembered as being the man who failed to assassinate Franz Ferdinand, when a bomb he threw at the Archduke's car instead exploded under the wheel of the one behind. Influenced by nationalism and anarchism, Čabrinović was one of the most radical members of the group, and is believed to have shown to Gavrilo Princip the initial newspaper clipping announcing the Archduke's visit to Sarajevo, which set the plan in motion. After the bomb was thrown, the Archduke's car managed to speed away to safety and reached the town hall as planned. Having failed with his assassination attempt, Čabrinović attempted suicide by taking a cyanide pill and throwing himself into the river Miljacka. This failed as well, with the pill being too weak to kill him and the river only being 4 inches deep. Arrested and interrogated, he stated during the trial, "We are not criminals. We are honest people, animated by noble sentiments. We are idealists, we wanted to do good. We have loved our people, and we shall die for our ideals." But interestingly, he also expressed some sympathy with the Archduke's family, saying, "We still have profound regrets. In the first place, we did not know that the late Franz Ferdinand was a father." Upon learning of this, the Archduke's children later wrote a letter to Čabrinović and forgave him. As he was still 19 at the time, Čabrinović received the maximum penalty of 20 years imprisonment. Already suffering from tuberculosis and kept in dreadful conditions, Čabrinović died on 23rd of January 1916, aged 21. Trifko Grabež, another assassin from the Belgrade group, Grabež was notable as the only one of the assassins to have had a police record prior to the assassination, having spent 2 weeks in prison for attacking his teacher. Later claiming to have been driven by Bosnia and Serbia, the assassination took place on Grabež's 19th birthday. Although he was the final assassin positioned on the Apple Quay, Princip and Ilić apparently had doubts about Grabež's willingness to actually carry out the assassination. This seemed to have been proven right, when Grabež failed to act as the Archduke's car sped past him following Čabrinović's attempt, although Grabež later claimed that it was because there were 2 policemen stood behind him. At the trial, Grabež defined the assassination as being the greatest revolutionary action in history and said, "It is time that Austria, in the person of Franz Ferdinand, pays for the atrocities committed in Bosnia-Herzegovina." Like Čabrinović, Grabež was ineligible for the death sentence, so received the maximum penalty of 20 years. He also died from tuberculosis on October 21st, 1916, aged 21. Gavrilo Princip. Princip is perhaps the most famous assassin of all, and the man whose name would go down in history. The leader of the Belgrade trio, he was by many accounts the most committed and enthusiastic participant in the plot to kill Franz Ferdinand. Princip dreamed of martyrdom, and was inspired by the example of Bogdan Zarajić, a young Bosnian Serb who had attempted an assassination of the Austrian imperial governor of Bosnia in 1910 and turned the gun on himself when the attempt failed. Having initially failed to act as the Archduke's car sped past him, Princip famously gained a second chance later that morning when the car drove back down the Apple Quay, with the Archduke en route to the local hospital to visit some of those injured by Čabrinović's bomb. Near the Latin Bridge, the car took a wrong turn into the street where Princip was standing outside a cafe. An urban myth famously claims that he was there at this cafe because he had gone to buy a sandwich, but sadly there is no historical truth to this. From this spot, he fired his fatal shots at around 10:45 am, and then quickly took his cyanide pill, which again proved ineffective. He was quickly seized upon and beaten by a crowd before he could end his own life with a third bullet. The royal couple died at approximately 11:15 am, around the same time that Princip was first brought before Leo Pfeffer, who would be the investigating judge presiding over the case. Pfeffer later remarked that he was shocked that a man as emaciated and frail-looking as Princip could have committed such a serious crime. At the trial, Princip tried to claim as much responsibility as possible for the assassination, perhaps to maximise his image as a martyr, as well as attempting to shield the Serbian government from any blame. He stated, "I am a Yugoslav nationalist, and I believe in the unification of all South Slavs in whatever form of state, and that it be free of Austria." His 20th birthday came just a month after the shooting, so he narrowly escaped the death penalty and instead received 20 years in prison. He was kept at Theresienstadt in the same awful conditions as Grabež and Čabrinović. Like the other two, he suffered from tuberculosis and at one point had his right arm amputated as his health rapidly deteriorated. At one point, he supposedly told a prison guard, "I suggest that you nail me to a cross and burn me alive. My flaming body will be a torch to light my people on their path to freedom." He eventually died on April 23rd, 1918, at the age of 23, with his infamy secured forever. Muhamed Mehmedbašić. Muhamed Mehmedbašić was somewhat different from the other assassins in the group. At 27, Mehmedbašić was the oldest of the assassins and had already taken part in assassination plots before, having tried to kill the Austrian governor of Bosnia, Oskar Potiorek, earlier on in 1914. Organised by the Black Hand, this plot failed when police searched Mehmedbašić's train for a thief, leading Mehmedbašić to throw his knife and poison out of the window after thinking that they were onto him. Notified of the new plot to kill Franz Ferdinand by Ilić, Mehmedbašić joined as one of the 3 Sarajevo assassins. On the day of the murder, he was the first assassin on the route, but failed to act as the Archduke's car passed him, apparently as there had been a police officer stood directly behind him. After the assassination, Mehmedbašić was the only one of the 7 to escape, making his way to Montenegro. After his arrest on July 12th, the Austrian authorities demanded his extradition, but he soon managed to escape from the prison where he was being held, almost certainly with help from the Montenegrin authorities. Hiding in Serbia during the war, Mehmedbašić was accused in 1916 of being part of a plot to kill the Serbian Prince Regent Alexander. In the hastily arranged Salonika trial, during which the Black Hand's leader, Dragutin Dimitrijević, was sentenced to death, Mehmedbašić was sentenced to 15 years in prison. This trial was later proven to be false, with all defendants exonerated, and was likely influenced by Austria-Hungary's demand for peace from Serbia. Mehmedbašić was released in 1919 after the war's end, and was pardoned by Alexander himself, now the king of the new Yugoslavia. Mehmedbašić lived long enough to see Europe plunged into a world war for a second time, and it was in this conflict where his life came to an end. The fascist Croatian Ustasha, who came to control much of Bosnia's territory during World War II, murdered Mehmedbašić on May 29, 1943, at the age of 56. In the present day, there is a street named after him in the city of Banja Luka. Cvjetko Popović. An 18-year-old student studying in Sarajevo, Popović was recruited locally by Ilić prior to the assassination. On the day of the assassination itself, Popović is believed to have taken up a position near the beginning of the route with the other 2 Sarajevo assassins. As one of the younger and less experienced members of the group, He perhaps lost his nerve, as he did not make an assassination attempt. Arrested after the confessions were made, Popović followed a similar pattern at the trial to most of the assassins under the age of 20, highlighting his own motives for joining the plot. In his case, he said he wanted revenge for the persecution of Slavic people that was taking place under the Austro-Hungarian administration. Popović was sentenced to 13 years in prison. He survived the war and was released in November 1918 following Austria-Hungary's defeat. Upon his release, Popović returned to education and became a teacher and later professor of philosophy. Interestingly, he later worked at a museum in Sarajevo, next to the exact spot where Princip had fired his famous shots. The night before the 50-year anniversary of the assassination, Popović attended a lecture in Sarajevo discussing the events of that day. 5 years later, in 1969, the 73-year-old Popović recalled the event in an interview with a newspaper. He explained his inaction during the assassination, saying, "If I moved forward with the crowd to see the car with Franz Ferdinand and his wife, I couldn't detonate the fuse. But if I stayed back against the wall alone, I could have been spotted easily, and moreover would have to lob the grenade over the heads of the crowd, taking a chance on the aim." Having lived long enough to see the consequences of the war that was triggered on that fateful day, Popović reflected, "If we'd known a world war would grow out of what we did, not a single one of us would have contemplated such an act. But our motives were pure. We acted out of conviction, and of that, certainly, there can be no regret." Popović died on June 9, 1980, at the age of 84. His death came just weeks after that of Socialist Yugoslavia's long-serving president, Josip Broz Tito. Vaso Čubrilović. Finally, we come to Vaso Čubrilović, who had perhaps the most fascinating life of all of the assassins from the plot to murder Franz Ferdinand. A friend of Popović, Čubrilović was the youngest of the conspirators, aged just 17 at the time. One of the three recruited locally by Ilić. Most sources seem to suggest that Čubrilović was positioned somewhere near Mehmedbašić on the Apple Key, being the second assassin on the route. Like Mehmedbašić, he failed to take action, perhaps losing his nerve at the crucial moment. Arrested with the others, Čubrilović expressed similar motivations as Popović at the trial and received a prison sentence of 16 years. Imprisoned in both Bosnia and Austria during the war, he survived and was released at the war's end. He returned to education and received his PhD in history from the University of Belgrade in 1929. His nationalist attitudes remained, and in the 1930s and 40s, he delivered lectures advocating the removal of ethnic minorities, particularly Albanians, from certain parts of Yugoslavia. During World War II, he was arrested by Axis forces and was imprisoned at Banjica concentration camp in German-occupied Serbia. After World War II, he held office in Tito's government, being Minister of Forestry from 1946 to 1950. He was also believed to have attended some of the 50th anniversary commemorations in Sarajevo, like his old friend Popović. In his later years, he began to distance himself from the nationalist ideologies that he had once held, and like Popović, expressed some regret over the assassination, saying, "We destroyed a beautiful world that was lost forever due to the war that followed." Čubrilović died on 11th of June 1990, aged 93. His longevity meant that, having used radical means in his youth with the goal of establishing a Yugoslav state, he lived long enough to see that state's entire lifespan, and died just as it was beginning to tear itself apart. Surely, there are very few people in human history who will have lived to have seen such a long-lasting and wide-ranging ripple effect of a historical turning point that they were once responsible for. As always, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.